Very pleasant good afternoon to all of our viewers. We are so grateful that you have taken the time to join us on another edition of Let's Talk. Let's Talk is a program sponsored by the South Leeward Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. And we, on this program, discuss issues impacting a program sponsored the church and the wider community. We are currently talking with retired presidents, getting their perspectives on the way they view the church now, learning from them over the years of experience serving in the leadership of the church. We believe that there is so much that they can offer still, even though they're retired. Thus far, we have spoken with Dr. Eugene Daniel, and last week we spoke with Elder George Brown. And today we have another special guest. In fact, all of our retired presidents have given a number of years of service to this church, and all will make a meaningful contribution. Today's guest, however, is unique in that he has served in 3 different divisions of the World Church. I told him a few minutes ago he qualifies to be president of the General Conference. We are going to introduce him to you in a while, but before we do so, we invite you to have a word of prayer with us. Shall we pray? Almighty Father and our God, be with us as we share on today's Let's Talk. We pray for your wisdom and your guidance. We ask that you will be with our guests, grant that everything will go well. The information he presents, may it prove meaningful and beneficial to those who listen. We ask that you will grant that our connections will work well, and may your name be glorified through this. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So yes, friends, we are here again on Let's Talk, and we are today interviewing another retired president. This time we have with us Pastor Al Dunford Francis, and he can tell you what the represents. Let me share a little bit about him with you. He, of course, will reveal as we go in the discussion various aspects of his life and ministry. But for now, suffice it to say that Pastor Francis has been a career missionary of the Seventh Adventist Church. He has served, as I said earlier, in 3 different world divisions. Of course, he has served in the Inter-American Division in the Caribbean Union, that is, and more specifically, until his retirement, he served as president of the East Caribbean Conference. He has also served the African Indian Ocean Division and also the West Central Africa Division. All told, he has given 43 years of ministry through the Seventh Adventist Church. He has vast experience in church leadership. He has served in various capacities in pastoral ministry, departmental director, a field secretary for division, president of a mission field, president of conference, and he's going to share more about that with you. He is married. He is married to Werner Francis. If he chooses, he will tell you more about his wife. They have 3, sorry, I'm giving him one more. They have 2 adult children and 3 grandchildren. And it is just a delight to be able to dialogue with a friend, a colleague, and a man of God. Pastor Francis, good afternoon and welcome to Let's Talk.
Good afternoon, Dr. Greene, and good afternoon, all our audience and those who are listening to us and viewing us. Delighted to be with you. Have a pleasant Sabbath, and I hope Let's Talk will be a great evening together again.
Well, it's such a joy to see you again since retirement. You're looking younger and fairer. You're inspiring me towards retirement.
And not before you finish.
Yes, that's right. I still have a little bit of the journey to complete. Now, I want to begin by asking you about your early life in the Adventist Church. Were you born as a Seventh Adventist? What was your childhood life like? And how, if, in terms of your connection to the Seventh Adventist Church, can you give us some information on that?
I am delighted to do that. I am the 10th child of two devout Seventh Adventist Christians, Dorcas and Carol Urbain. The name Urbain may be familiar in Antigua because he served as a colporteur, literary evangelist in many of the islands, including Antigua. I also had an aunt, his sister, one of his sisters, who was a Bible worker, and she also served during the islands, and Antigua was included. She was Irish Dean Francis, and I know that there are some individuals in Antigua carrying the name Urbain and also carrying the name Irish Dean. And as far as history says, they they got their names because of the influence of these two individuals who worked at the island. So they were devout Seventh-day Adventists, and we grew up in the church. The church was the center of our lives. We did everything in the church. Being the 10th child, then I had to learn collaboration and common ground as you forge a lifestyle that be compatible with what you were taught. Many of my siblings also went to our schools and also worked at different levels of our school, our church system. So I am in a diehard, they really true-blooded Seventh-day Adventist. I love my church. It was the center of my life. My home church, Black Rock, was a church that recognized uh, talent and developed talent. And so at the tender age of 14, I was allowed to teach a adult Sabbath school class and to serve the church in many capacities. So going through the church's program, you learn so many things through the preaching and the modeling. Everyone felt valued. We did. There was no generation gap. When I was a young person going up in the church, the adults helped to uh, encourage the young people and make them feel wanted and appreciated. So that's sort of a bird's eye view of how I began.
It's interesting. Did I hear you say that you were a Sabbath school teacher of an adult class at the age of 14?
That's what I said. And that's why I said the church was willing to give young people a chance. That particular Sabbath school class had my parents in it. And I remember, I will never forget that, which helped too. That the Sabbath day started, the adults in the class started to talk about things which I had no clue about. And I decided then I would have to be even more diligent student. So in that sense, it was helpful to me. It was not only I guess maybe to some extent it might have been embarrassing to them, but since they had a mind they wanted to develop the youth, so conscious that they would not always be there, they gave us the opportunity.
That's very interesting. Interesting. So you unlike many other individuals who may even be listening to this program now, you grew up in the church. I'm not going to say you were born a Seventh Adventist because, Cleveland says even if your mother serves even if a midwife served your mother on the pew, you're not born in the church. You have to be reborn.
Yeah,
But your parents were Seventh Adventists, and you grew up in the church. You grew up under Seventh-day Adventist influence. Can you remember when you were baptized? What were the circumstances that led you to committing your life to God? Sometimes when individuals grow up in the church, it's just natural that, they get baptized. But was there a particular memory? Is there a particular memory that you can reflect back on and say, these were the sets of circumstances that caused me to want to make that decision to follow Jesus as my Savior?
well, I put it in two steps. I think that the church's program is the teachers in the cradle role, the kindergarten, the primary, the junior teachers, the different departments, they understood what church was about. And they were trying to lead us to make decisions. And so at the age of 12, I got baptized. I guess it was sometime in July 1961, 62. I think the pastor was a pastor by the name of L.D. Braffett. He was a nice pastor, good pastor. We all had other pastors who influenced us, like Pastor Linford Williams. He was a Jamaican. And then we had a close relationship to Pastor Howell, who sort of was very close to my family. And later then Pastor Phillips, Leon Phillips. But at the same time, I say about myself that I was truly converted to God and to Jesus Christ when there was a crisis in my life 6 years after. We thought our dad would die, and I was very close to him, and that was really a challenge to me. And then the idea about God being my father, when you're going to lose your earthly father, but you still had a father who is even greater than your earthly father. That was the significant time when I would say that I was truly converted. Although I grew up in the church, I was baptized at 12. So possibly around 18, I would say I was converted as a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. And ever since then, I am completely committed to Jesus Christ and whatever talents he's given me that I would use for his benefit.
Now it's interesting that you were able to share that. I have a particular interest in individuals whose parents were Seventh Adventists and who remain committed to the cause, because these days it's almost a novelty to that some people may find that interesting, but to find first generation, I mean, not first, but third and fourth generation Seventh Adventists who are still involved in significant ministry. So many children who were born in the church, and I'm speaking particularly to the reference you made to the role of your Sabbath school teachers in the children's division, that they understood that they had a job to mold you as a young boy to want to be committed to Jesus. There's so many of our children who grew up in the church and today they are not in the church. They do not have a relationship with God. So it's inspiring to know that you not only stayed in the church, but were passionate enough to really walk with God, stay with God, and to commit your life to a life of ministry.
That's right. Well, a lot of Seventh-day Adventist parents are not enablers, I would say, because when a pastor or a leader of the church, the elder, Sabbath school teacher, is encouraging a child who has grown up in the church to be baptized, oh, you're too young, they say. They are not ready. Now, if you've sent them to Sabbath school for all their life, and they went through cradle roll, kindergarten, primary, junior, they have been exposed to Adventism at a maybe even a deeper level than some of the adults have been exposed to Adventism and its teachings through those series of lessons. And then the Sabbath school used to have a program then called Decision Days, where the members of the Sabbath school were asked, both adults and children and youth were asked to decide for Christ. Very few Sabbath schools have that program again, but that was part of the life of the church then.
Because Sabbath school is meant to be an evangelistic unit as well.
Exactly.
And it's important that we were discussing, emphasizing, especially in the children's division, that decision day initiative you're talking about there. That's pretty meaningful. As you seek to communicate to the youngsters the need to live a committed life for Jesus.
Right.
Now, tell me a little bit, as we're talking about what used to be. How was church life like What was it like back then in comparison to today?
Well, I would say the comparison is the difference is stark. You know, if we begin at the beginning of the week, Sunday night services, very few Adventist churches have no Sunday night services, and then you as members you were invited to bring your colleagues, your friends to the church, and they would be preaching, especially on Daniel and Revelation. Not that other topic might not come up, but you were actually going over like a every week evangelistic series, a continuous going on. So people were exposed to the teaching of the church. That's Sunday night. Wednesday night, we would have a bigger attendance than we actually have these days, but we would cover many of the topics. You would have different people participating because participation, total participation was the name of the game, if you want to put it like that, because it was felt, and I still think we believe, that the more we participate in any activity, the stronger we are bound to that activity, more we are committed to that. So Wednesday night service, then we had on Friday night sometimes a meeting especially for those who were the only Adventists in their families. They wouldn't have a family to welcome the Sabbath, and the church provided that opportunity. Then on Sabbath, it was Sabbath school. It was 10 minutes. It was divine service. It was Bible class or baptismal class. Also, at that same time, the other members of the church could go and do missionary work, tract distribution, visiting the hospital. And then you would still have MV or AY to end the Sabbath, to close the Sabbath. So most people spent most of the time on Sabbath around the church and in the church's program. And for AY, as Dr. Brown said last week, there was no generation gap. All the adults were there to support the young people and to encourage them. So that's how the church was like in those days. And we also included where we had open air, we had in gathering. I thought that when we think about in gathering, one of the wonderful things for me was when in those days you would have in gathering magazines which covered the word. And so when I went to Madagascar and I went to a place called Masanga, the leprosarium, it was amazing that I had read about this Masanga hospital, which was a special hospital for leprosy, in Gathering magazine when it was in Barbados. To walk on that place, you felt that indeed you belong to a wonderful church. And then when we think about the Sabbath school lesson, it was really conducted on a whole. In classes, it was conducted in classes all the time. And you got to understand where people were. The pastor and the elders would be able to discover who's thinking about the church or the doctrines of the church were not correct, and the teachers would be able to do visitation. And so we also used to ensure that people used to have record keeping, ask if people studied the Sabbath school lesson, and also what missionary work they did during the week. So all of this helped to keep people focused on what being a Seventh-day Adventist was all about.
Now you said a number of things there that I'm going to have to ask you to drill down on a little bit because they're very interesting. Now you a recently enough retired president. I don't remember when it was that you retired. 2022. And so you mentioned a couple of things that you can identify with COVID and the COVID effect, because I heard you saying, granted, I don't know what obtains in East Caribbean Conference where you last worked, but I heard you saying that there's hardly a Seventh Adventist church that has Sunday night services these days. Interesting enough, I just did an analysis, my first quarter analysis for the South Leeward Conference. And indeed, Sunday night services is not where we want it to be, but I think 50% of our churches are having Sunday night services. But right after COVID, it was much lower than that. So there is some coming back. But the Sunday night services, what sometimes, you know, in my early years in the church, we used to refer to as evangelistic services.
That's right.
And, you know, the Daniel and the Revelation and those kinds of things. Um, Even as you reflect back on your years as president of East Caribbean Conference and what you used to obtain while you were growing up in the church as a youth and what obtains today or when you were president, um, what do you think has happened in terms of the time commitment of members? Because Sunday night services used to be something that everybody looked forward to and going back and inviting their friends. What do you see as the challenge? Why so many persons are saying, I know particularly after COVID, everybody wants do it on Zoom, do it on Zoom. But I'd like to hear what is your assessment of that?
Let me say up front, I understand the dynamics of COVID and what happened. And I would mention about technology, use of technology. I'm not hostile to technology. I figured the church should use both physical, in-person worship. COVID changed a lot of things in our lives. And we need to, as a church, to adjust to that. I think part of the problem is that we are not as flexible in creating new ideas, but we are very easy or easier to give up ideas. And that's the challenge I think the church faces. So the Sunday night services provided an opportunity for us to have an ongoing evangelistic presence in the community. When in Barbados, I understand for some time because of changing circumstances, maybe crime and so on, they had a time where the Sunday night services were reduced because of the dynamics and because of the circumstances in the country, but those were, you know, not long lasting. But gradually, you know, whatever happens in North America, we tend to pick up, and so North America does not have it, so we don't have it. Most of the time, most Christians here, most Seventh-day Adventists here attend church once a week on Sabbath. Everything, church boards, meetings, everything is done on Sabbath, which I don't think is where we should be going. And we need to find creative ways to engage our membership. Our competitors, the evangelicals, are in church nearly every week, every day, and they seem not to have the attrition rate that we have. I remember when I was in the division, the West Africa division in Cameroon, I was having a workshop down there. And a Sunday, I saw people running to get to their church just because they were late. I don't see that among us as Seventh-day Adventists. We don't mind. We come in whatever time we get there is okay, you know, because our value of the holy and sacred seem to be slipping.
Well, I suspect, you know, that there is some unfortunate correlation between prosperity, economic standing, and spiritual commitment, and that's unfortunate.
That is also true.
I remember visiting in Colombia, South America.
Right.
I remember how committed those people were, and how time conscious they were. I remember one Wednesday evening when we got there, we were going to they were having a service, and the lady who was looking about our stay, you know, said, listen, if you it begins at 7:15, but if you want a seat, you better go there for 6:30. And we laughed, you know, coming from the Caribbean context, we laughed. Exactly. We said, what is the lady trying to tell us? And we decided anyway, we're going to go 10 to 7. And we were amazed. We were blown away when we got there 10 to 7 to see the crowd of persons. And we were at the back of a line. And what we noticed is that the young people are always early in church.
Right.
Always on time. So there was that level of commitment. You talk to them, the missionary mindedness. And I think sometimes the ease at which we live, you know, we don't have much persecution. Once upon a time, it was difficult to be a Seventh-day Adventist. These days, it's relatively easy, and so we take a lot of things for granted. And I want to put it down to that. I don't know, but that's my assessment.
Yeah, that is part of it. That is part of it. You cannot deny that is part of it. That the wealth or the growing of and developing in the societal standing has affected the church.
Okay. Now, we will talk more about that in a little bit, but I do want to move on because I'm mindful of the time. You know, you would not believe that we're almost halfway through.
I
So
tell you.
so let's go. You eventually became a minister of the gospel. What led you to decide to become a pastor?
That's an interesting story. I growing up in the church and seeing all the, I don't want to use the word conflicts, made different points of view being expressed. I was always active in the church, so I was aware of the life of the minister. I said, okay, I was teaching when I graduated from secondary school. I went to do teaching, and I was enjoying my teaching profession. People thought that it would have gone far. And then when I went to the youth camp in 1973 in St. Martin, that's where I met my wife. Also, camps in those days, youth camps in those days were recruiting events, so that during the camp you would have leadership recruiting workers. And so when they were recruiting in 1973, I agreed to the idea that I would become a teacher for the church. So I just completed my teacher training program at Erdeston College, and I said, well, okay. I went back to Barbados. I continued teaching. But then what I considered that God was weaning me off of it. I became more involved in the life of the church. I was president of the Central Association, was a group of youth churches, youth societies that form an association. And we had just, in 1974, we planted the Grisette Seventh-day Adventist Church in Barbados. Pastor Ben Carroll, you know him. He was the preacher of that campaign. I think we baptized 20 or 30 individuals. And we bought an old building from a church, another denomination in Bank Hall. And I became the first elder or the first leader of that Grisette group church. And in 1975, well, we had camp in 74 in Antigua at the conference-wide camp. And then I made the decision to, if the Lord really wanted me, since I was losing my desire for teaching, more involved in the life of the church and leading the church and so on, I said I would go and become a minister to do ministry, not preaching.
Interesting. You wanted to do ministry and not preaching.
In other words, I think ministry is more than preaching. That's what I'm saying.
Well, it certainly is, yes. You know, and so you went off to CUC.
Yes, I went off to CUC in 75, and I graduated in 79. And I went to Suriname because when I graduated, East Car was not willing to employ me at that time. I graduated a little ahead of my class since I was a trained teacher. So I was free from the first, at the end of the first term in 1979. So I went to Suriname. I was picked up by the Suriname mission then. And it's interesting, I am not a linguist. I don't like particularly languages. I'm going to work in a Dutch country. That's a whole nother story. But I went, and as far as the record says, I was successful I was ordained in Suriname the 2nd of April, 1983. That is even just under 4 years out of school.
So you spent a few years in Suriname. I mean,
almost 7 years.
Okay. I mean, you got married during that time? You mentioned
I got married August 15, 1979, the same year after graduation, because it was thought that it would be good if I had a wife when I went to Suriname. And since I know you're one of your best queens, I would say. Verna Samuels from Jennings, the 10th daughter, the 10th child of Roy and what's her name now? Irene Samuels.
Um,
Yeah. So I married her in August 15, and I took her to Suriname. We spent our honeymoon in Suriname. The conference was so mission was so gracious to give us the time off, although because I had to be in Antigua 15 days before the marriage, and according to the law, and I was not entitled to vacation, but we negotiated that since when they employed me, I told them I would get married pretty soon after in 1979.
so you went and served in Suriname. I know you eventually did some service in Africa, in the Ocean Division, then in the West Africa Division. Um, how did that come about? What caused you to?
Okay, from Suriname, we went to St. Vincent, and from St. Vincent, we came back to Barbados. At St. Vincent and Barbados, in Suriname, I was a pastor evangelist, and I also became a director before I was ordained. And Pastor Gasby, S.L. Gasby, I don't know if you know him. I thought that was so wonderful. He came down to Suriname to orient me in departmental work, which was fun, which was fantastic. I was young, I didn't know all about it. I have worked in many departments in my home church, but to get the explanation, to understand how the church works in that area. Then when we came back from St. Vincent, we served in Barbados for 1989 to 92. During 1991, Pastor Bain called me and said they were looking for somebody in West Africa, in the African Indian Ocean Division, to be youth director in Madagascar, the Indian Ocean Union Mission. And he recommended my name. I said to him, well, if the call reaches me, that was something that we decided. If a call reaches me, I would say yes. I would figure that is the Lord's will, because there are many ways that it could be blocked. So we had session in Barbados in 1991. I don't remember the year. And Pastor Peter Prime said to me at the beginning of session, that he had a call for me in the union. They hadn't passed it on yet. And that was the call to go to the Indian Ocean Union Mission to be youth director. So during the session, they recommended me to be, I think it was church ministries director. And because that's before personal ministries, you would know that. Yes. So I went to my former president, then Pastor Charles Williams, who was president in Suriname, and said to him, what should I say to the nominating committee? Because the secretary of the union, Pastor Peter Prime, told me that he had a call for me. And so he said to me, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. So he said to me, if the brethren here are asking you, accept it, because we don't know what will happen to the call. And I found out after that the thinking was that if they thought that I would say yes, they would not have passed the call.
Oh.
So not knowing whether I would say yes or no, when they went back to Trinidad, the call was passed. And by then, Pastor Leon Phillips was president. So Pastor James Daniel was secretary. And so maybe, I think if I remember correctly, the day we were to have committee to present ideas as new directors is the same day the call came from the union. So Pastor Daniel came down from his office, what is this? What is this? I said, what is what? So he said he then produced the call. So I said to my boss, my then boss, Pastor Phillips, I said, well, give me your counsel as a senior minister. What should I do with this? He said, well, we would like you to stay, but we think for your development, for everything, you should take it. I said, okay, so what else do you say to me? He said, well, stay as long as you can. So he got 7 more months out of me before we left in 1992 for
So let me just slow you down a little bit, because you did accept to be um church ministries director,
Yes, of the
and then the
conference.
call came.
Yes.
Yes, and your president, Dr. Leon Phillips, of course, I know, many of the names, I'm beginning to feel old, because many names you call, you spoke about Linford Williams and Leon Phillips and
Right.
Asby and all those fellows. These are individuals that I know. So I'm beginning to think maybe I'm not so far from retirement after all. But it's interesting, because you're saying that your president, Leon Phillips, when you ask him, what should I do? He said, we would like you to stay, but for your own personal development, we think you should accept it. That's interesting. Here is a president who recognizes that you going on the mission field would help you to develop as a man of God, to give service and to broaden your horizon. And in as much as they wanted you to stay, he said, this is better for you to do it. I think that was commendable.
Yeah, I think so too. So we went and we served in Madagascar as the youth director. I also carried communication at that time with the youth director. Well, it was personal ministries then, before we turned back, because in 1995 they moved to what it is now, the canceled personal ministry, which was for 10 years, and then they went back to what we have now, which is we have personal ministries rather than church ministries, and they reduced the size. It was Sabbath school and the activities, or personal, what you call it, personal ministry now. So yeah, so we served in Madagascar for 4 years, and then we were sent, because it was not a call then, because it is the same union. We were sent to Seychelles to be the president of there. That's a whole story. I won't tell you the details of it, or I could tell you privately. But the going to Seychelles, that's the first administrative role I took, as president of Seychelles Mission. We had about 300 members in Seychelles at the time, but Seychelles is they call it the African country that has the highest GDP. So it is a wealthy country in that sense, tourism and things like that. Beautiful, but small. They had about 116 islands. About 4 are really the main inhabited islands. The others are places where people come to watch birds and so on, bird sanctuaries and so on. And we doubled the membership. When I left, it was 600 and some. We had one massive youth congress where the other fields in the union came, and we had a 3-week campaign. The young people were from the different fields were there for about 10 days, and they helped in the field preparation and the visitation. That was we baptized over 100 people in that campaign. We had a guest speaker from the division, youth director from the division came to preach. And then in 1999, we left. We were called to Mauritius, a Mauritius conference. That's an island like the same topography of Trinidad and Tobago, same type of people, combination of people, Hindus and Roti Del Puri, Northern Range. So we were there for 19. So there was a 5-month period where I was president of both fields, Seychelles Mission and the Mauritius Conference. And then I was moved from there then to Indian Ocean, no, not the West Africa, WUM, the West Africa Union Mission, Union Conference, Union Mission. So I moved from there to Liberia, where there was war. That is an interesting story, because when they called on November 1, that's my daughter's birthday, I was in the study and my wife was in the kitchen, and I asked the person who was speaking to me if they were talking about the place where the war is. And my wife was in the kitchen. She could hear my side of the conversation, but not what I was being told. And she said to me, "Well, Danny, why are you giving the people trouble?" I said, well, this one was he crazy. But in the end, we understood it was God calling us to that. So we went to Liberia. We served in Liberia from 2002 to 2003. We were evacuated twice before we went to the division. In between, the division was changed from the African Indian Ocean Division, AID, to WAUM. I mean, to WAD. WAD was actually, we lost the Indian Ocean side, the islands in the Indian Ocean, and it was basically 28 countries in Africa that formed that division. We were, before it was changed to WAD, we, in the African Indian Ocean Division, we were up to 1,500,000 members, and the new division was only 700,000 members. So that's the thing. When I went to the division, I became a field secretary. That was in 2003. And I also served as ministerial secretary and also stewardship director, mission director. So that's what I did at the division.
So you got quite a vast international experience
That's right.
What was it like coming back to the Caribbean? Because you did return to the Caribbean sometime. You tell us when. But what was like
2010. Well, as a church, since we have elections, you can't determine whether you will stay or not. And so in 2010, all division directors are elected at General Conference session. And so at the 2010 General Conference, we were not re-elected to stay in the division. So we came home in October 2010. My son got married in Antigua on that same October. And then I applied to all the fields in the Caribbean. And nobody employed me as such. I think it was the fact that they did not know that it was coming. And because when the division president then spoke to Pastor Eugene Daniel, who was president of the union, said, well, what are y'all doing for Francis? He said, well, we don't know where Francis is. He said, Francis is home. So something went wrong with the communication then. And then I became personal ministry director of the Caribbean Union from January 2011 to session. And at session, then I was reelected until I served there until East Carib had their session in August 2013. And I became president of East Caribbean Conference then. So that was the journey.
Now, in terms of cultural differences and adjustments, was it difficult readjusting to the Caribbean climate, culture back from where you served?
I wouldn't say it was difficult because as I said, I am passionate about my church. So, you know, and the Saints, I did not serve in just one territory in Africa. In Madagascar is different from Seychelles. Seychelles is different from Mauritius. And Liberia is completely different. In Liberia, we didn't have portable water in the house. We didn't have portable electricity in the house. We got water by tanks. We got electricity by generator. And the cost of generating electricity at home was so expensive that we actually moved back in sort of time in terms of the amenities we would have. You had the facility of a refrigerator, but it didn't make sense because you didn't have electricity often enough to keep the refrigerator cold enough to be of any use. So my wife had to learn to cook every day, small quantities of food, because whatever you cook that day, you had to use. And I think so. Coming back home was not really, it was just the normal adjustment, not significant adjustment. What was different, I would have thought that some of the things that we were saying in Africa about what happened in the Caribbean, we came back and found that they were no longer that way. That was quite challenging for us in a sense. Sunday night meetings were gone. Some of these things that we were boasting about were no longer there. So, but you know, it was not so difficult to readjust.
Now, because we don't have much time, I want to hasten on. It's interesting, thinking about your journey and your missionary service, and you were there talking about no potable water and in the house and that kind of thing, and we're talking about 2003, 2005.
Yeah. But you must remember, Liberia had 14 years of war. And, that's one of the reasons why my daughter was sent to, at the age of 14, was sent to Kenya to go to school. So she, since 14, she has not lived with us for more than 3 months. It was hard for us to do that. But when you think of the challenge, most females in Liberia during that period of time were raped. And we didn't think that was something that our daughters should be exposed to. And so you had young people in Liberia who were 14 and now they are 24 and didn't finish secondary school. So it was completely different. And you can't believe some people who were high up in the government before Mr. Taylor took over, they would call the new leaders little boys, but these were the little boys who had the power. And so some of them were executed, some of them were raped. We were evacuated twice from Liberia in 2 years, and it was tough. You have to leave, and you say you believe in God, and that was a question that I had to wrestle with. How God, you were telling these people you are leaving, God will protect them. So if God will protect them, why don't you stay? So these are some of the challenges that a missionary will have.
When you hear of like the developments in Haiti, for example, having served in Liberia where there is war, and you think, Adventism is very well established in Haiti, for example. We have, what did they say, last figures I heard, 500,000 Adventists.
Yeah.
And the challenges of serving in a situation like that. I'm assuming that you look to that situation with a certain degree of sympathy.
Yes. At the same time, I think you might have heard that I did have a program in East Caribbean Conference, especially for the Barbadians, in mediation. For many years, I believe that we as a church have not entered that arena. And I would say in Haiti, that's what we need. We need, Pastor Dotton is doing some of it, I guess, at a very small level, where he meet with the gangs and so on. But I think we need, in a place like in Haiti, we need to, as a church, to be involved in trying to bring these gangs together and helping them to understand that that is not the future of their life. That cannot be the future. And I used to say when I was in Africa, I said, look, as far as I'm concerned, the Seventh-day Adventist Church is a church that should bring and could bring the revival. We have the moral standing, we have health, we have education. We are the ones. But I remember in 2002, I think the church put on a statement on peace, which was a very good statement on peace. But I do not think that as a group worldwide, we have tried to be part of the peace process in any country. We have allowed the Catholics and other religious organizations to take that place. And I think that's a place that we should have. So we right now in Barbados, I think we have 6 or 7 individuals who have completed the course who could work with government in mediation. We are hoping that will go further, but that is one of the things that I think that for Haiti that we need, because when I did my master's in Jamaica, I was amazed that you had maybe 1 Adventist to 9 members of the population, and there's the crime level and the challenges in the community is so high. I know they've started some work up there, but they were, my information, I don't know if I'm correct, that a particular group from the university, one of the leaders were assassinated, as it were, because they were trying to do this work. But we will be, once we begin this work, we're gonna have to expect, like other missionaries in other areas. When we came home, people say to me, Pastor Francis, don't feel badly. We are happy that you're going home because many of us had dreams that only Verna came home.
Mm.
And I mean, and this is not now necessarily non-Adventists getting rid of you. It could be even your brothers or sisters.
Indeed, indeed. You know, it's interesting. You're raising some issues there. My mind just went back on Rwanda and the massacre there,
Exactly.
you know, and the challenge. And you know, these are issues we have to confront because when you have an Adventist population in the kinds of numbers that you have in a place like Haiti, you really do need to ask, you know, how are we being the salt of the earth as we
Exactly.
ought to be? So these are very challenging questions, but in terms of our willingness to get out there and to mingle and to make a difference, to take part in civil society and to interfere with certain processes. You know, that sometimes I think we shy away from, but it is something we need to address. And maybe one of these days we will devote a session or two and let's talk to those kinds of things.
Yes.
Right now, the Religious Liberty Association, in fact, come Thursday, the Religious Liberty Association, the Caribbean Religious Liberty Association will be hosting a webinar, 5 to 6:50 p.m. That's Thursday afternoon. And you know, it's an effort to get the church sensitized to our responsibility to create a positive impact in society and to interfere with the trend, the violence and the crime that is happening there. And so that is a very good thing that the Religious Liberty Association, I mean, it's religious liberty and public affairs. And we see that as a part of our public affairs, a part of the public affairs dimension. And so that's why we are doing that. And you know, I know that the various churches should have had information on that today, and I trust that they will all sign on and spread the word so that we can begin to make a difference in our respective communities. But Pastor Francis, our time is going rather very quickly. So I need to get this question in. You know, we're going to overlook a few things, but you can always come back. In fact, I'm hoping that sometime in May, I can have all of you who have participated in this interview. While I do it individually, I can have at least 2 groups of you where I address some of the concerns that you raised. So I want to ask you, in fact, let me squeeze this in because a listener is asking this question. The listener says, Jeremiah 6 verse 16 says, ask for the old paths and walk therein. What are old paths that your guests, would like to see come back?
Well, some of the old paths I would like to see come back is that some of the traditions which we had should be how should I say? Take for example, a big concern of mine is the widening gap between the youth and adults. And in many churches, there's this generational gap, and we are having maybe hundreds, thousands of our young people leaving the church. The young people claim that we, the adults, don't know how to speak to them, and I have to grant them sometimes we are not as sensitive to them as they should be. But for me, it also has a reflection on how did we educate them in the first place through the primary Sabbath school. That's why I mentioned create a role and coming up, and even pathfinding and adventuring and pathfinding master guide. How an AY society, how did we impact them? I am not sure if this is true. I never really was able to find out in East Carib, but there's so much talk about the lowering of the standard. People, well, I could say this, but I can't maybe give you all the analysis of it. I went to a youth camp and I was asked to speak, give 4 presentations for the young people to get an honor. And I gave one presentation, and many of them came with their cards to tell me sign since I gave one presentation, which suggests that the standards are being lowered just to get a pin. And the whole concept about Adventism, inculcating in them to become good Seventh-day Adventists, we are losing that. So that's one thing. Then it seems to me the urgency of the coming of Christ is not being promoted in our churches. That's the old way. We were known as people of the book. We were very committed to seeing people think. Then you have the falling support for Christian education. Like myself, the battle, the policy says 10%. Most of us are much higher than 10%. Why are our members who are Seventh-day Adventists not supporting Christian education when we realize it is the home, the school, and the church, the three legs that help us to produce good Seventh-day Adventists? And then the drift, I would say, is another thing, the drift towers, autocracy in leadership. The democratization. In the 2022 church manual, it says that business meetings, we must have at least one business meeting a year, which there were times before when the church officers would report to the church every quarter. Now, if you are saying one a year and you have elected people for one year or for 2 years, it means in those 2 years, they will only report twice to the church. That means that more power is being given to a smaller group where the church is closer to a model of leadership that we don't appreciate. And we don't think that's the model that brings the best, because God has gifted all of us, and each of us have talents that we could use to help the church to become stronger. Those would be the 4 areas that I think we need to see how we can get back to.
And each one of those is a separate program altogether. We can spend the hour talking about Christian education, and we can spend the hour talking about the whole sense. You mentioned there, I think the first point you made about the young people wanting you to sign after only 1 or 4 presentations, and I sense something I have spoken to already, that the whole principle of integrity, and how much do we really put into practice the principles of honesty and model those kinds of things as leaders
Exactly.
to our young.
Mm-hmm.
So those are very interesting things, but we have 1 more minute, so I'm going to ask you another question. I know you're raising the concerns, and like I said, I'm hoping that we can come back maybe in a group setting to discuss some of these things. But while you have those concerns, and I suppose more, there are lots of things I wanted to ask you, but I do have to ask you, what hope do you have as you look at the church? You sense, notwithstanding the challenges, it's God's church, and I want to believe that though the challenges may be great, there are some things that give you hope. What do you see today in the church that inspires you?
Well, I think that we are captives of hope. And Sister White says it so beautifully. We have nothing to fear unless we forget how God has led in the past. We have seen the church make mistakes in the past. We've seen members and leadership fail in the past. So all that we are seeing now, we have seen before. Yet the church still exists. And I have that confidence. And speaking to you, I could say that, you are younger than me, but there are many people who have confidence in you, and I myself do. So I know that we have younger leaders who, even the fact that you could run this program of what I would call mass education, because I think that education is one of the issues that we have given lip service to as a church. People getting baptized at 15, 16, or even 20 who did not pass through Adventure, Pathfinder, and Master Guide. How do they know how this church runs? Where is the effort to educate them? What you are doing here in this program, I think, is a fantastic effort. I applaud you for it. But leaders like yourself, when I went to Africa, I saw young leaders in high positions who, some of them, all of them, are passionate about the church. Even here in Trinidad, I think at the union, they employed a young lady. I don't remember her name, who works with the secretary, executive secretary, who is into what you call it now?
The ACMS thing there.
Statistics.
Statistics, yes.
Yes. She is passionate. So when I see young people like that, when I see men and women who have that passion, not men, not all everybody, but there are a number who we have hope that God can turn it around using individuals like yourself, your secretary, and other individuals who could help to turn this thing around, allowing God to lead them. And we who are retired, as you said up front, I think we still have a contribution on many of us, if not all of us, I know, who are retired, are willing to respond whenever we ask. I do things in East Carib up to now. I teach Sabbath school here in the church I attend, so we are still giving back as much as we can and whatever experience we have to help to make the situation better. In that sense, the church is a captive of hope. We shall overcome.
Amen. Amen. It's unfortunate that our time is up, but that's how it is. I want to express profound gratitude to you for sharing. There's so many things you mentioned that we can, as I said before, spend so much more time on. But it was a pleasure having you, and we wish you a successful, restful, fulfilling retirement. And that idea of mediation is something you may be hearing from South Leeward Conference on, in terms of you're retired, so you have time. So we may just call you over because it's such an important element that we need to look at, and in terms of how do we as a church make a difference in the society. But Pastor, we enjoyed the session with you. We ran out of time, but we're grateful for the information that you were able to share. Next week, folks, we are going to continue this conversation. We will have another guest next week. Based on my lineup, we are supposed to be talking to Pastor John Josiah. You know him well, Pastor Francis.
Yes.
We're supposed to be talking to Pastor John Josiah next week.
You must give him my condolence for I think he lost a brother.
Yes, his brother was buried on Thursday of this week. I was at the funeral myself there. And he should be our guest next week, former president of the North Caribbean Conference. We have learned so much over the last 3 weeks from our retired presidents. And as you see, they may be retired, but the information, the knowledge, the passion is still there. And we wish you God's blessings. And as I said, to those of you who are listening, on Thursday, we have the webinar sponsored by the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Department on crime in the Caribbean, a church-based response. Look out for the information. It's in your various church chats, and we hope to see you then. Pastor, thank you so much, and God's blessings.
Thank you. God bless you too.
All the best to all of our viewers. We'll be back next week, same time, 3 p.m. for another edition of Let's Talk.